Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden, and I apologize for my voice on this episode. I'm allergic to New Mexico, and it's killing me right now. But we're going to try to make the best of it, and hopefully I don't sound too bad by the end of this. I have a returning guest, Leon Conrad, and he has a long list of accomplishments. I've needed a little bit more time to talk to him about his book, Story and Structure. For any of our listeners who maybe haven't heard the first episode, go ahead and introduce yourself, Leon.
Well, hello, DelSheree. Hello, listeners. Hello, world. I am Leon Conrad. I am based in London, UK. I'm a story structure consultant. And what interests me about story is the way it flows, what drives it forward. Underneath those good details of plot and character and conflict and climax, what is it that makes story work?
And we're going to delve into that a little bit more. But before we do that, Leon, this book recently won an award. For those who aren't familiar with the Nautilus Award, tell them a little bit about it and what category you were in.
Thank you, DelSheree. I was very honored to win this award. It was a silver award, I think, in the writing category. It is an award that is all about celebrating better books for a better world. And it has had quite a long history with some very impressive prize winners, which is an honor to be among them. My book was highlighted for the innovative work.
Yeah, I was looking through the list and the different categories, and it is an impressive list to be able to add your name to. So that's really awesome and very exciting. With yours, you mentioned the innovation behind your book, and just to kind of review for listeners who might be picking up this episode, Story and Structure takes a really different approach to analyzing story structure. It's much different than the typical, what you get in kind of a beginning creative writing class of, the 3 acts and the roller coaster image. Very, kind of cut and dry. This is what a story looks like. And you take a different approach. So before we jump into some of the new stuff I wanted to talk about today, briefly explain your approach to story analysis that you use in Story and Structure.
Of course. Let me tell you 3 ways in which Story and Structure is different to other books on writing. First, it deals with the time of the tale, not the time of the telling. So the order in which events follow on one another chronologically. That's really important. The second way it differs from other works on writing is that an individual character's storyline and analyze that, rather than trying to analyze the path that a whole story or a whole narrative takes. And the third way it differs from other books on writing is that it uses 6 very simple, visually intuitive symbols drawn from the work of one of my mentors, George Spencer Brown, to depict or symbolize that flow of story through a character's storyline, those key events that either impel them forward or stop them from flowing forward, or perhaps bringing them up in front of a surprising event that makes them stop and think,
And you use in several of the chapters folk tales to illustrate this. They tend to be a little, not necessarily simple stories, but shorter and less subplots and trails off into other things. So that they're nice examples for analyzing and discussing the story structure and how that can apply to others. And using that as a learning tool, you used the 3 Little Pigs and a couple of other folk tales to illustrate how to start mapping out that flow of a story structure. And it was interesting to see how you can take a really simple story and then look at the different structures that you line out and then apply those to more complex or longer stories, more involved with subplots, and bringing those elements together in different ways for different types of stories. But it all breaks down into a structure that you can look at and recognize with the symbols. Okay, this is the type of story it is. This is the structure that you're working with here. And I really liked that approach of taking familiar, less complicated and all over the place stories to start that with. So I felt like you could really start this approach fairly young, with young readers learning how to more critically analyze stories rather than just, here's a cute story, that was a fun story time.
Well, I'm glad you picked that up, DelSheree, because that is a key influence on my love of story and my interest in story as a phenomenon of human consciousness. We have been telling stories well before the advent of writing. The earliest written accounts are of oral storytellers, oral traditions, stories held in the heart and expressed on the tongue, which you still have, luckily, around the world.
Well, and I think that was something that struck me with oral storytelling, living in the Southwest with some of the Native American traditions. That's something that is still, and maybe being revived a little bit more, the idea of oral storytelling. And one of our local libraries has been doing a storyteller series. I think they started it last fall, and bringing in people who are doing oral storytelling rather than just reading to the attendees. And I thought that was really neat that they did that, because at least in our area, and I know in a lot of areas of the United States, we don't have as high of literacy rates and reading comprehension. Those skills aren't where you would like them to be in a lot of ways. And I like this approach and its simplicity in a lot of ways, because it could be used at young ages to start building on those skills, I think, a little bit more and earlier, and start developing that comprehension a little bit better. That was something, especially in the last chapters I was going through, that really piqued my interest. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, of just how this way of looking at stories helps with that comprehension and understanding. Sorry, I threw a lot at you at once.
That's okay. I like to get things sorted in my mind and then try to address them in order. First of all, let's think critically about your question. Your question has an underlying assumption that the written word is primary, and that should be the goal of education. We use oral storytelling and oral techniques in order to be a highway towards the real destination, which is reading. I would challenge that. People have got on for a long time without the written word. The written word was, in ancient cultures, part of a priestly class. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I am saying that learning to read and write is not what literacy is all about. Literacy can be about being street savvy. And you learn that from stories. Stories like Red Riding Hood, in their original versions, were cautionary tales. There are stories like Jack and the Beanstalk. Again, in the original versions, Jack takes revenge, breaks and enters, steals magical goods, because the giant has killed his father. He's taking revenge. That bit of the story doesn't often get told. In West African cultures, there's a whole chapter in my book about dilemma tales. Dilemma tales are tales in which the storyteller deliberately puts a dilemma in front of an audience. So there's an example from a Calypso song. If your wife and your mother were drowning, I want to know which one you would be saving. Here are the lyrics. You can only save one. Which one is it? It's a question that's almost impossible to answer. And it encourages a debate in the listening audience. Some might say the mother. Why? Some might say the wife. Why? And that encourages critical thinking. To move on to the latter part of your question, the approach in story and structure doesn't just analyze individual story structures. There are 18 of them that I've discovered to date. Those 18 structures are all related. They fit together, they expand from each other, and they converge to one particular story structure, the creation myth structure. It's to do with God said, let there be light, and there was light, and he saw that light was good. and creation just flows on from there. There is no problem. It's not that God looked around and said, oh dear, it looks a bit dark. I think we need some light. Let's make some light. No, it just flows forward. One thing follows another. I think that's how we are called to live life, more flowingly. And I think that is what stories teach us. They teach us how to cope optimally with different types of problems. And what I show in the book is that each story structure is related to a different kind of initial problem. As soon as you have that kind of problem, you know what the optimal steps are to follow in order to solve that problem. And sometimes problems can be solved within your own capacities or with the help of your friends. Sometimes you need help from a higher power, and there are stories that follow that kind of structure.
Thank you for going into that a little bit more. I think that's a great point of how literacy gets classified as an academic thing is not necessarily the whole picture. And one of the things that was on my list was your comparison of story and academic writing. I thought that was a great comparison of story and the similar structure with what's expected in academic writing. And you talked about how there are similarities, but there are some missing components in academic writing and in that, typical 5-paragraph structure. And I just thought it was interesting just how many correlations there are. I have a few other things in my notes that really struck me with what you're talking about and how much it applies to so many different areas. But before I throw too many things at you at once again, talk about that idea of the similarities and then what you suggest is added to that academic structure to make it more complete and to make more sense to people as they're writing.
I talk about this in chapter 5 of Story and Structure, where I introduce, first of all, the storyline of the 3 little pigs. They follow a quest structure. Probably all your listeners will be familiar with the story. The 3 little pigs, there are different versions of the story, so their initial problem varies. They find themselves on the road journeying towards an uncertain future. That's their journey. On that journey, they meet friends or helpers. And because it's a simple kid's story, they get the materials they use to build their houses. They end up in a straw house, a twig house, and a brick house. The wolf comes and knocks at the door, and you get a try again loop, where the wolf sometimes is successful in eating 2 of the wolves, but he's still hungry, so he ends up at the 3rd house, knocking on the door, still hungry. The pigs get the upper hand, they defeat the wolf, and as a result, end up being able to live safely, free from any threat from the wolf. That solves their problem of finding how they can live as independent little piggies. And the story ends. The quest structure is very simple. You have a character who has a problem. As a result of having the problem, they go on a journey. On that journey, they meet a friend or helper who gives them the tools they need to defeat an enemy or hindrance, and they end up with their problem solved. An academic essay will follow exactly the same structure. And if we teach kids this, that they already know the structure, all they have to do is follow it. But because we're telling an academic story, the character is going to be whatever topic is going to be the subject of the essay. Let's say uniforms should be banned. Discuss. Let's restrict it to school uniforms. That's the topic. It's the opening of a discussion. It's not a problem. The problem is that people don't agree what should be done. So we have to go on a journey. That's the methodology. And the methodology we're going to follow is outlined. We're going to interview the people who hold one view, and then we're going to interview the people who hold the other view. One set of people will be your friends and helpers, because you will have a particular point of view. Another set of people will be your enemies and hindrances, and that is your conclusion. That is how you defeat the enemy or hindrances, and with the help of your friends and helpers, come out trumps. That is a standard deliberative essay. Sometimes you'll see merit in both sides and you'll come to a compromise conclusion, and sometimes you'll come to an original view. And that addresses the elephant in the room, it addresses the opposition points of view, and it engages in a critical debate. What people do sometimes is advocate what I've heard called a 5-paragraph essay. And this is to take a theme, a topic, explain the definition, the background, the context, and then present the conclusion, the point of view, with some supporting evidence. What that does is, in my view, and in the view of a couple of authors I cite in the book, present a one-sided and unsatisfactory piece of writing. It's okay as an initial task to be able to follow a thought through, but ultimately it's unsatisfactory because it doesn't involve the wolf. If you leave the wolf out, it ain't going to be such an interesting story. It only works if you're some kind of prophet and you are revealing a truth to the world. And then you can follow the creation myth structure. You can just flow on one track. But even then, if you look in the Bible, it is very binary. Ecclesiastes, there is a time to reap and a time to sow. You can find binary thinking in most religious texts.
Very true. Just to continue with what you were saying, adding to just that very binary structure of an idea, I think that is an important exercise, not only in academic writing, but you make a lot of connections to just really life lessons as well when you're talking about some of those. And one of the things you made a point of was that in a lot of stories, when that problem's presented and there's conflict, that the character goes through that journey of the back and forth and through that flow. I liked your phrasing of the energetic pulse of a story. That not only just it's a really great phrase, but it gives a sense of that movement. And when we're expending energy, there's a cost to that. And you get to the point where things get resolved or you get to the next stage. And even when you get to that point of coming back to an equilibrium of some sort, you're not quite the same afterward. Wherever you started, you're not going to end up at the same, even if you're reaching similar points of equilibrium at the beginning and end, you're back to a satisfying situation. And I thought not only was that a great reminder for story structure, for writing, and as the reader looking for that point of coming back to equilibrium, but I really liked that connection just with people as they go through a situation in their own life, that when you get to that point where you can okay, I'm over that. I got through that difficult portion. You've learned, you've progressed, you're different in some way. And I think that applies with looking at when you're doing academic writing as well. You said not just, here's some information, I laid it out for you, boom, the essay's done, but coming to a new understanding of something. That was just something I really liked, all of those connections of story with academic, with just getting through things in your personal life as well.
And we do follow these story structures in our everyday lives. The quest structure is the structure we follow when we're looking for a set of keys we might have lost. The transformation structure is the structure that stories in Ovid's Metamorphoses follow. And that is described in chapter 7. Typically, it follows a very simple, condensed, it's the shortest, most condensed story structure I have discovered to date. It just has 2 steps. There's a transgression against the natural order and an immediate and sudden restoration of balance. But as you say, things are never the same. Something is transformed and things will never go back to how they were. That's the essence of the stories in Ovid's Metamorphoses. The other structure I talk about, which involves balancing things out, is an Eastern story structure. It's very common in Japan. It's called the Kishoten Ketsu structure there. It's also known in Korea and China under different names. It's described in, chapter 14. Ketsu stories, koans, and dilemma tales. The Kishore Tenketsu stories are interesting in that they take a theme, they develop it, and then out of the blue, something which seems completely unconnected is introduced. There's no link, there's no preparation, you're just faced with this unexpected thing, which is part of the structure, and either the storyteller, if it's done orally, will leave it to the audience to make the connection between the two seemingly unconnected themes, or they will round it off themselves and explain the hidden connection between the seemingly unconnected parts of the story. And that's another way of coming to terms with balance. It's all about consensus. It's not Western Hegelian dialectic where you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's smoother, it's more flowing, it's more accepting.
I think that's interesting as a writer approaching developing a story, keeping in mind those two approaches of, okay, I'm writing a story, I'm going to have, such and such beats, and here's going to be, climax is going to happen in chapter 22, and then we reach a resolution and it's tied up and it's great. Like, that's the end. And a different approach of looking through, especially some of the non-Western story structures that you go into here, that I think maybe a lot of writers in the United States especially maybe have not been exposed to or had a lot of experience with, that more circular pathway and kind of a different view of what you're accomplishing in a story. And some of that with like the transformation, with more of just the journey itself and learning from that and coming to understanding that it's a different approach than just plotting out those beats and you followed the structure, you followed the pattern. So great, this is going to be a successful story. There's different ways of approaching story. And that's something that I really enjoyed about going through this book, is so much of what you learn about, especially in early days of like wanting to be a creative writer of some sort, is getting those very basic structures of this is how you do it. And I like this approach of, yes, you can break down the structure and look at it and see which ones are similar and where those are, but it really highlights the variety of structures out there and the purpose and why one structure is used over another, and what you can learn from that as a writer. I found that really interesting, and a lot of really neat things. It's like, I'd really like to learn how to utilize some of that and to widen my thinking of how I approach a story.
They grow as you engage with them, and they help you grow. That's what I found. Spencer Brown's work, which has inspired mine, is the gift that keeps on giving. It's very simple. It's based on a unary distinction, what he calls the form, and he takes two things as given at the beginning of the work: the act of indication and the act of distinction. Distinction forms something like a circle suspended in some kind of space. The formation of that circle creates a distinction between an inside and an outside. It allows you to point, to indicate either the inside or the outside. Whichever one you point to becomes marked in his terminology, and the other one by definition becomes unmarked. It doesn't matter which side you point to, there will always be a marked and an unmarked state. But it's a unary form, not a binary form. It's fundamentally different because it's unary. It's one thing, a three in one, the inside, the outside, and the distinction between them.
That is a very different mindset of approaching it. And I think that is really neat and something to explore. I really enjoy reading stories that take a different approach to things and are unexpected in the way that they're put together. I think it would be great to be able to expose young writers and readers as well to some of this wider variety of story structures and start to understand that better and incorporate that. I think we tend to get very isolated and insular in our own communities and our own cultures of how we view a lot of things, but that media that we're exposed to tends to happen in a bubble sometimes, and you don't get that exposure to other ways of looking at things and viewing things. And I think that that's a really great thing to have an opportunity to learn more about that. So I really appreciate your approach with this book and just the wider view of story and how it's used in different cultures and the purpose behind it. That was one of the things I've really enjoyed a lot through reading this.
And you mentioned reading. So when you as a reader encounter a story, you are going on your own reader's journey through that work. And your listeners may be writers. If you are a writer listening to this and you're thinking, well, the story structure is fine, but you've told me that your story structures work on the time of the tale, not the time of the telling. I don't want to tell a story in chronological order. I want to do flashbacks. I want to do foreshadowing. What have you got to tell me? Well, take your reader through their own storyline. Give them surprises. And those structures of surprise and suspense are story structures in their own right. You're crafting the reader's experience as a narrative story structure. But then how you do it is also bound up with language and the beauty of words and the sounds of words. The more I look at story structure, the more interested I become in the link between rhetoric and story structure. Rhetoric being originally the power of speech to inspire, to persuade, to inform, to entertain. And what the original writers of rhetoric manuals did was sit at the feet of oral storytellers, sit at the feet of great orators, and analyze what they did in great detail. And so they came up with structures like series of three. And they noted that series of three work when they are highly patterned. Take veni, vidi, vici, for example. 3 two-syllable words, veni, vidi, vici, in Latin, which mean I came, I saw, I conquered. And you get what's called a rising tricolon. I came is quite neutral. I saw, there's an interaction, and I conquered, there's an active move to change things. The intensity grows. I might have come because I heard a rumor. I wanted to check things out. I saw with my own eyes, I was able to verify things, and then assert or deny the state of things and bring forth something into being, either by conquering through action or by voicing something as being so. And that changes everything. Everyone comes in order to see what's going to happen. The king parades, they actually see not this magical thing that has been circulating as a rumor, but the truth that they might be very stupid because all they see is nothing. And there you go, the little kid says, hey, the king is naked. And the spell is broken. That 3-step sequence is one of the structures, one of 2 dynamic structures I write about in the book. And the dynamic structures are very much applicable to the craft of writing a story. You may want to tell something out of order. You may want to craft a scene with a lot of detail and then come to a climax very suddenly to surprise the reader at the end. These techniques, these dynamic structures, the revelation structure and what I call the Chinese circular structure, will help you do that.
Well, thank you. We're out of time again. I never get through everything I want to talk with you about, but I appreciate you so much taking the extra time to come back for a second interview and talk more about story and structure. Just a topic that I love and I just find fascinating. And so for those who want to pick up a copy of Leon's book, it's Story and Structure, A Complete Guide by Leon Conrad. And Leon, thank you again. Tell people where they can find you and find your book.
Of course, just visit leonconrad.com. The book is widely available online and on my own website. I'm working on a new book called Master the Art and Craft of Writing, a series of writing games. There's over 150, I think, in the collection, and it's all to do with plot patterning, how to write, tell the story once you've sorted out the structure.
Wonderful. I look forward to seeing that because that sounds great. All right. Well, thank you again, Leon. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, DelSheree. It's been a pleasure.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.